Our gospel story today only appears in the Gospel of John. And I'm always intrigued, therefore, why John, who's so often recorded the detailed, almost philosophical words of Jesus, also records some quite punchy and arresting stories that the other Gospels ignore. In some ways, today's story has its echoes in the other Gospels. In the story of the Syrophoenician woman who challenges Jesus when he says it's not fair to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. And she challenges him that, yes, Lord, even the dogs eat the crumbs. And Jesus responds by healing her daughter. Jesus is able to have his perspective on things widened by a conversation. And something similar is happening here. Mary comes to Jesus and shares with him a social disaster in the making. The host is about to run out of wine. If that had happened, there would have been a loss of reputation, a feeling of embarrassment. And for years afterwards, if Cana was anything like Ottery, they would have been known as the family where they ran out of wine. They were not terrible people. They'd done nothing terribly wrong. They just undercatered, perhaps underestimated how much people would drink, or been a bit tight with the provisioning, hoping it would be enough. Do we ever approach life in a similar way? That what we give, we hope will be enough. Maybe not quite enough. Our common fund payments, for example. People give, and thank you, but it's not quite enough. And it's a bit embarrassing. And we are known as a parish that can't pay its way. So in this situation, Mary approaches Jesus and asks him to intervene, asks him to put right the situation of the host. And Jesus pretty well says, "But out, Mum, this is not for me to sort out." I paraphrase, you understand. Now, when I was working with Philippa and her sisters on Thea's funeral, they talked about Thea having the look. A look that could make grown men quake, and boy, did it get stuff done. Well, I feel that Mary gave Jesus the look at this point. Because, she noticed, she just turns to the servants and says, "He'll get it in a minute and give you a job to do. Do whatever he tells you to do." Remember Mary? Not a pushover, not a simpering miss, but a force to be reckoned with. And someone not afraid to square up to this strange, complex son who has this mission she doesn't understand, but which she knows will walk him into trouble. I wonder what look Jesus threw his mother. Respect, realization, a fresh comprehension, love. He responds to her challenge, and a miracle, or a sign, as John prefers to call them, happens. We come to know what more of God is calling on our lives when we have conversations with others, when we allow ourselves to be challenged, when we think, oh, it's not the right time, and I'm not the right person to be doing that, or I'm not the right person at all. And sometimes we need that other person to say, really? I think you might be. I think you might actually just be the right person at the right time to do this job. Our conversations with others help us to grow in our sense of vocation and discipleship. What is God asking of me right now, just as I am? And other people may see the answer to that more clearly than we can ourselves. So Jesus takes the water and turns something already good into something amazing. Remember, again, it's only in the Gospel of John that Jesus is recorded as saying, "I came that they may have life and have it in all its fullness." And this statement is what the miracle at Cana is all about. Water, the basic necessity of life, is changed into wine, the symbol not just of life, but of full and joyous life. Wine in the Bible is a symbol of warmth and celebration and abundance. In changing the water into wine and allowing the wedding celebration to continue, Jesus is showing people his mission, which is to transform the world. We so often think of transformation, of changing the bad to the good. Well, yes, God does take ugly lives and transform them into lives of beauty. God does take us when we're sort of crawling along on our bellies and gives us wings to fly. God does take us when we're broken and makes us whole. But there is another sort of transformation that's modelled at Cana. At Cana, the object of transformation is something that already is good and pure and necessary. There's nothing that needs fixing in the water. Water's good. But there is a message. There's a message about the law and about Judaism. The jugs that Jesus had filled up, those stone jars, were the water jars used for ritual purification and washing. They were there so the wedding guests could comply with Jewish law. And Jesus takes that ritual water and turns it into something that wouldn't satisfy the law. Washing your hands in wine wouldn't count. Jesus is making a statement about the law. The law is life-giving, necessary, good and pure. But Jesus came to transform the law into something that was not just necessary, but joyful. It wasn't that the law was ugly or evil or impure. What they had was good. But Jesus came to transform the law through grace, to put love into it, to make it more than plain water, to make it wine. And I think that's the message for us, isn't it? You know, we're mostly okay. We're kind of pretty well on the right track. Basic level of faith in God, treat our neighbour with respect and mercy, live a life of moderation, gentleness and self-control. This is the message for those of us whose life is like water, good, nourishing and self-sustaining. How could we be transformed? There's a beautiful children's book by Anne Holm called I Am David. I hope some of you might have read it. It's about a boy who escapes from an internment camp and is eventually reunited with his mother. He has to endure incredible hardship, and in many ways his spirit is broken, and he has to learn how to live in a no-camp world from scratch. At one pivotal stage in his journey, he meets an artist who offers him dinner in exchange for painting his picture. She asks him to lay the table, a job David takes very seriously, but also finds fun. He finds a piece of cloth, pretty plates, silver knives and forks. She has some fine glassware tucked at the back of a cupboard, and David places 2 candlesticks on the table, a beautifully shaped black bowl, and he lays a pink flower in the bowl. When the artist comes in, she exclaims, "Heaven preserve us! Where did you learn to set a table, young man?" And David looks at her and says that he likes things to look beautiful when he eats. The artist begs his pardon and says that he is right. What one does every day should be done beautifully. Later in his life, Jesus took bread and wine and transformed them into something beautiful. He commanded us to do that in remembrance of him. It's why we lay our table in the best and most beautiful way that we can. So what do people see when they look at your life? What in your life draws those who don't feel thirsty, who live decent lives and are relatively happy with their lot? Is there any indication in your life that you serve a God who turns water into wine? And if you remember the story, it's not just cheap wine, it's the good stuff. Do people see our religion as something that turns water into wine, or does it look more like turning wine into water? Because our faith should speak to people of beauty and of elevating the ordinary into something extraordinary. People whose lives are suffused with faith and love and grace and hope. Those are beautiful people. And you know what? There are plenty gathered right here, right now. People whose faith makes them shine and radiate with God's glory. What would our church look like if we let Jesus turn our water into wine? To make our church a place where life is lived in its fullness and people come to it and, more importantly, leave it with a greater sense of that in their lives, a yearning to know more, and a willingness to be transformed. Amen.